Well, thank you all of you for being here today. And obviously, we had Fifi on stage earlier, and it's a heartbreaking moment, I have to say. Poor Fifi, Sheila.
Yes, I know. I have to say, I remember doing that and not knowing what was happening. And I still don't. I mean, creatures pop up from all over the place. I tell you what, though, you get the impression it's sort of marvellous example of modern art. It looks stunning, doesn't it? I mean, I never watch myself. I never watch anything, so it was an ordeal to do that. But I completely forgot about myself because I was so intrigued by the production values. How on earth did you all do it? I mean, it's extraordinary that we were in 2 rooms, I seem to remember. But the effects and the costumes and the makeups and the sheer creativity of the show is absolutely stunning, in my opinion.
Well, I'm really.
It's true, the design in that one is really spectacular. John Asbridge, for instance, John Asbridge was the set designer, and
fantastic.
And the costumes and the makeup were just superb.
Unbelievable, they really were. They really were, and that.
But all 3 departments worked in tandem, which was a joy, because it
create
doesn't
the
always
world,
happen that way.
But you shot it beautifully, darling.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, no, seriously. I mean, some of those shots. I always say this about all popular television. Everybody doesn't. Well, Doctor Who does get acclaimed, but some of the series like Coronation Street and things like that, they are marvellous performances, beautifully shot. I mean, I always quote Vera. You know, it's a police series, but my God, it's good.
Yeah.
And you see on this, you've got top quality. You're good too, darling. You're lovely. You play the spoons as well, don't you?
It's my one talent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start off maybe down with Sylvester and Sophie. I wonder if you just share your initial
Can
kind
I throw a spanner in the works? And
Why not,
just
Andrew?
Shout out to Dominic Glynn, who did the fantastic music. And
Yes. Absolutely. Fabulous. Really good.
I was going to ask maybe if Sylvester and Sophie, you could just share with us some of your initial thoughts, having just watched it on the big screen with an audience all these years later. What your kind of feelings were, you know, whether you're kind of proud of the work, and if any kind of initial memories have been kind of stirred that you hadn't expected to have thought about.
Well, while I was watching it, I kept wondering, who is that chap? I recognise him. It was great fun. Well, it was all great fun. Every one of the stories were just great fun. We had such fun making it. We were there, definitely, we'd never got sent away for being miserable while making Doctor Who. No, it was terrific, really. It's you've got to think a lot, go back to. I mean, it was just the energy that was in it was great. There was great energy, and the Kandy Man. I didn't realise how brilliant he was.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a huge part. I only had those scenes with him, you know, and I never kind of when it came out, I used to hide behind the couch when I came on, so I never saw those scenes. You see, so.
But the moral content of it was so wonderful too.
It
the
was,
story.
and it's still
the whole thing about happiness. I do hate happy people. I really do. Those sort of people. You know, those boring people who see the best side of everything. I believe in having a good moan.
But it is still so relevant, isn't it? Like some of those lines you could just, you know, you could see in a drama today and go, oh yeah, that's very current.
But it was quite a complex moral story, wasn't it? I mean, you people who know about Doctor Who so well, I mean, it just, the complexity of the idea. I mean, and I seem to remember I halfway through decided I might put on a voice a bit like Thatcher. I don't know whether it was the entire idea of it, but it did. It does sum up a dreadful period, doesn't it? The ugliness of that period.
All power to Graham Curry, who
believing
had that
they're
conception.
right. You know, believing she's right.
That was exactly what Graham was writing.
Was
it?
it?
It came across beautifully. I mean,
Did he intend it to be Thatcher, or was that me?
Yes. And so he he intended it, but never told you that, so you picked it up out of the air. So it was fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
But I believed, I remember, although I never followed the plot. I mean, those little people that came on the end, who the hell were they? Honestly. I mean, marvellous makeups, but where did they come from? What were they? But I so believed in what it was saying. I really did believe in what it was saying. Sorry, your turn.
Andrew, you were actually hauled onto Newsnight, weren't you, recently? Can you tell us about that?
Recently, it was about 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Recently,
but it was decades after the show went out and decades ago. But what happened was, there's always mileage to be had in the right-wing press for knocking the BBC.
No, I got one for it.
Somebody, they interviewed Sylvester, in fact, and they got wind of this because
I told them about
my job interview, right?
Oh right, no, about the Thatcher thing. I told them, right? I was they phoned up to ask me why David Tennant wasn't doing Doctor Who with a Scottish accent. And that was where the conversation started, and then we started.
No, but they sold it to us as being something completely different. So that, you know, these rather loathsome journalists. So they spoke to Sylvester and they got wind of the possibility of a BBC knocking story. So they got in touch with me, and it was presented to me as being sort of a follow-up to talking to Sylvester. But what they wanted me to say was about how anti-Thatcherite I was, which I was. And so the slant of the story was left-wing pinkos in the BBC.
Yes, I'm proud to say.
Undermining anti-Thatcher. And so this all blew up years later, and they...
but it happened at the time. I remember being accused at the time.
Yeah. But decades later, they were still banging on about it.
But I think it was also partly not liked by the Doctor Who fans, because it was not the usual Dalek story, was it?
I think people saw the surface, the camp surface, and they didn't realise, they didn't see the evil underneath. They didn't stay to see what the point it was making.
I'm interested to what the modern Doctor Who fans think of it.
I think they love it.
They'll let us know in a minute.
Does anybody not? Does anybody object to it? Does anybody think... No, seriously, does anybody say that it doesn't follow the Doctor Who genre? Because it is a bit different.
I guess they wouldn't have paid to be here if they...
You're right, it was daringly different. But I think people, also at the time, Doctor Who was constantly accused of being camp. And so people just saw the camp surface, but they didn't stay to see what, the powerful, dark story, the brilliant story that Graham engineered for us.
It was ultra camp, though. Yeah. Oh, my God, is it? That is the definition of camp. Everything about it, the causes, the performances, everybody's over the top.
And the pink TARDIS.
Yeah. Yes.
And that was the brilliance of it, because you've got this surface glitter and niceness, and it's deeply evil. Right.
Deeply, evil and worrying, and it sums up life in a funny way.
So you've got those pink and red costumes instead of, the black Gestapo, but it is the Gestapo.
Yeah.
So that was the brilliance, the conceit.
Let's bring Sophie into. I know Sophie.
I dispute is, if it was so happy, why didn't she paint the walls pink? It's a very gloomy place.
Well, I think that they've landed in the ghetto at the beginning.
Oh, I didn't get that.
I'll have to check the script to make sure.
Oh, so they're not at home?
Well, what it is that's the bad part of town, as far as I know.
Oh, I see. So they don't see the glamorous
And also
bit.
it's taking place at night, because we very deliberately wanted kind of film noir feel, which Chris...
Is it right that at one point you were going to film it in black and white? Was that a possibility?
No.
Yes, I was told this afterwards, that they were going to do it in black and white and do film noir angles. And I thought, I wish I'd found that out. I would have gone in and begged him to do it, because at that time, I mean, the colour television was, really established. But my two young sons were 12 and 11, and they were starting to get into black and white. And I thought, they are. They're ready now for black and white.
We were thinking of the third man, you see, because we did have the cameras. We did have the cameras on a tilt. At the beginning, which was the first kind of murder scene and all the rest of it. And so the right camera was tilted that way, the left camera was tilted that way, and the middle camera was straight on. So it worked for a while.
Because they were static cameras in those days, pushed around.
You moved around. So we did that for a bit, and then we were falling rather behind schedule, and John said,
Get on with it.
bloody thing, just put them straight. It's going to be a nightmare.
But it's also like the Muzak, is that you eventually have to drop it out because it's just too much of it. It's a good idea, but it's too much.
Yeah.
Good idea to blow it up.
Yeah.
Brilliant idea.
I really want to bring Sophie into the conversation
sorry.
now, because
right.
on a few occasions she's almost got her words out, and so much excitement here, and to remember things. But Sophie, I wonder if you can share some of your memories, because obviously you were still, although it was the second series, you were still really establishing yourself as an actress, and obviously you'd taken over this role during the first part of the first series. But
Yes.
this is properly your moment now in this series, wasn't it?
Well, I think by the Happiness Patrol, I felt very comfortable. I mean, I have to use this moment to thank Chris, because I would not be here today without this man, because Chris cast me in the first place.
So you're to blame.
Absolutely. And you don't know what's good for you.
And then Sylvester and I mean, we got on so well right from the beginning, didn't
Yes,
we? And you were so generous with allowing us to develop a story together in our relationship. That I actually felt very comfortable. And I have seen some outtakes actually from that, you know, the Candy Kitchen scene where I'm chucking you the
That's a great throw, by the way.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Luckily, I didn't catch it by the hot end.
But
only painted
I've seen
red.
the outtakes, and I was actually being incredibly sort of, well, I don't want to say bossy, because that's a sort of word that's often used about women,
Yeah.
and I think it. But I was saying, look, if you do this, and then I'll do that, and I was basically directing from the floor.
So you felt
Sorry,
really
Chris.
comfortable.
That's all right.
So
She was
I
only
kind of-
12.
Yes.
And I wonder whether we could just talk, I mean, we've touched on it already and we've talked at the start, but obviously it feels to me as if, you know, if Graham had been here today, he would have been so proud. And we talked about, obviously, the fact that he had, you know, sort of some less favourable feedback, which actually is such a sad thing, because actually a lot of people do love the story.
But I do think the expanded edition will show his writing off to even better advantage, because there was a lot of things there that were just tags of scenes, which will make a whole lot more sense, and also more of his brilliant dialogue, like a knife through butterscotch. Now that's incredible. Just fantastic writing.
I also think that the Kandy Man was slightly to blame for that, because in the script he'd written this evil. He was going to be a sort of kind of nasty-looking character, and then it kind of the whole Bertie Bassett thing blew up, and there was real trouble because of copyright and things like that. And
Who
poor
could have seen that
David-
coming?
And
So I'm
poor
not quite
David,
sure
who-
how we got that far
No.
to shoot it.
But it's great. I think it's better. It's better than the concept in the script. I love the Bertie Bassett thing.
Yeah.
It's just
In Canada, did you have Bertie Bassett?
But I was born in England, buddy. I mean, I grew up in Canada.
Yeah, I know. In Canada, you grew up there, so that's what I mean. So
No,
you didn't have Bertie
answer to
Bassett.
your question,
So,
no.
yeah. Well, that's it. Then you weren't frightened. You just say, "Oh, but put it on," and then you got away with it.
It must
wasn't
have put the
until-
kids off liquids all sorts then, isn't it?
Well, they went absolutely nuts after it went out.
Did they?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was all sorts of lawsuits.
I
And,
wonder why.
Really?
yeah. Well, I would have thought they'd have been delighted.
Yeah.
But, you know.
But the guy in the Candyman costume is so great, and the
Yeah.
dialogue is so great. Because I remember there was a point where he had to answer the phone, and I thought, how
I
does
was
the
gonna pick
Candyman
it up.
answer the phone? So oh, no, just not physically, but what does he say? So I rang up Graham, and Graham said, oh, he just said, Candyman.
Yeah. Well, he got a laugh today, which was delightful, which
This
was
is
great.
It was
Yeah.
a wonderful group of daft actors,
Yeah, it
wasn't
was. It was really
Harold
good.
Innocent.
Yeah.
And
Ronnie
Fraser.
Fraser.
John Normington,
Yeah.
Ronald as well as
Ronnie Fraser,
as,
who was off
Penny
the booze
Thatcher.
at that time, but I mean, it was quite near the end of his life then.
He was, unfortunately.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was
Wasn't
ill
it?
while he was.
He
And all the
was
girls
poorly.
were
He looked
absolutely
poorly.
brilliant.
Yeah.
They were
I
fantastic.
seem to remember Georgina Hale was training them, like she was.
Well, she thought she was the boss. Well, she was really in the story.
She
So
was
Yeah,
running
yeah.
a crack
She took
team.
over
She was
as
drilling
sergeant
them.
in
She was
arms,
drilling
yeah.
them, yeah. But
was great.
But
Georgina
it's
Hale's
great
yeah.
parts for women. I
Yeah.
mean, for
Yeah.
a change, as you
Yeah.
rightly said, darling.
Yeah.
You know, the women are written. I mean,
Yeah.
masterful and
fantastic,
in control and all that.
Look, I've got to say, you were wonderful in that. You're just so great.
Well, I seem to remember I did enjoy it, but I was always puzzled.
Curious.
I used to always Ronnie Fraser didn't have the slightest idea. He kept saying, "Where are we now?" I don't know. It looks like there's sweets all round. I mean, we just.
But you had a strong grasp of the character. And that's all that it took, really.
I liked what it was saying.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's probably what attracted me. That I was so angry about what was happening in our country that I liked the idea of it being illustrated in a popular piece that turned out to be not popular to begin with. But I think it's a classic bit of cinema, don't you?
Yeah.
I honestly do.
And
I really do.
But it was quite funny because at the time I do remember people uniformly didn't like it. They didn't, and it really got a lot of flack, and we were defending it. And then gradually going to signings and conventions, over the years, people have come up and said, it's my favourite story. And I remember being quite taken aback at first, and it was usually the younger generation who were coming to it for the first time and saying...
Well, they like sweets.
And pink and things. But I think gradually it has been completely reevaluated, and quite rightly so. And I just wish that Graham was here to enjoy this.
Yeah. It's incredibly relevant now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's full of... You keep going, oh, gosh, bits of it. Extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary. I was all right watching. I never watched myself, but I mean, this one, I got really engrossed in it. And I was just looking at the composition, and occasionally it looked like a modern art. Like, if you took the frame out, it would be a modern picture. It really would.
It's great visually.
I've been a very good girl, and I've read my latest edition of Doctor Who magazine already. And there's a brilliant interview with John Asbridge, the designer, in that.
That's great.
Yeah,
because he's a genius.
And he talks about the fact that, or somebody talks about the fact that all the fronts were meant to be facades in that set to these crumbling buildings behind.
It was like a New Orleans kind of vibe.
Yeah. And so that's why they were like that. But it doesn't kind of quite come across on camera because they look a bit too much like sort of stage sets.
Well, I thought the lighting needed to be... I didn't think we had the best lighting, most sympathetic lighting for that.
The trouble is, you're in a multi-camera environment, and trying to get it actually that low was a miracle, really.
I'm so glad you did, though.
So he donned it as well as he could in the time. Nowadays, obviously, you'd like all sorts of things much better and more sympathetically.
We all forget what the cameras were like in those days. They were Daleks in themselves, pushed around.
They were like Daleks.
Cables and
there was never any time.
I mean, you did comedy shows,
time.
you had 5 of them.
Yeah.
And they were cutting as they go on the thing.
So that you have to light for 5 cameras rather than for 1.
That's right.
Yeah, and as I say, no time, no money. And then today, when the wrong files turned up, I felt quite nostalgic. I thought, it's just like doing Doctor Who.
I felt something quite different. I won't share that with you.
So what have they done to jazz it up?
Oh, it looks
the version we didn't see.
What you could have seen was more special effects, more like there was some models replacing some of the existing sort of space scenes. And
do the cars go any faster?
I don't know. Did the car get?
You will keep
True
that
Mad Max
version,
style.
though, won't you?
Yeah, so obviously they'll coexist. There'll be the original edition and the new edition. Some people will gravitate towards whichever one they want to. I wonder, Chris, if I could just ask you about the fact that you worked a number of different Doctor Who stories over a few years, and this one definitely, despite you've got the Kandy Man and these fun elements, actually it's probably one of the darkest stories actually when you kind of boil it down.
Yes, I think that's true, and that's how we felt about it. That's why we went for a very claustrophobic set. We were never outdoors, so you didn't have
completely
that lightness.
all studio, wasn't it?
All studio.
The last studio-bound Doctor Who completely until Boom 35 years later, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
Well, no, that's not right, because Ghostlight was too.
Yeah, Ghostlight.
Was this film before?
Because every year, because John Nathan Turner was great with money, he had a budget where he could do a 6-parter, which was part OB, outside broadcast, and part all studio. But he thought, that's very boring. split it into 2 3-parters, one of which is all shot on location, one of which is all studio, more or less. So each of the 3 seasons I worked on, we had that.
But was there nothing outside in Ghostlight at all?
No. There was one shot, external shot.
Yeah, there might be one external shot.
So this is...
Thank you very much. There
this
you
is
go.
the last completely studio run.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
and
that's
also
why,
different
and
brightness.
therefore you make it dark, but you can't just have dark on dark on dark, because it'll get very gloomy, which is why we then zhuzhed up the costumes and the makeup and, you know, the other stuff to counteract that. It was kind of New Orleans stroke crumbling Venice sort of was.
Yeah, Venice, that's right. I
there
remember
was
discussions about that.
But that was when the BBC had a makeup department.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be possible to do
I know, because
that
there was a
much.
lot of wiggery going on, and then your white faces, and everybody was a bit in revolt about, what's it going to do to my skin? What's in this thing? You know, we had a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by my nails.
They were good, weren't they? They looked very modern, as if you'd been down to the
Amazing.
Vietnamese
And your
store.
frock was amazing, really.
Yeah, it was.
Yes.
It was. I just thought.
Do you still have it?
I thought some. No, couldn't get into it if I did. But I just think it was stunning to look at.
Yeah.
I really did, and I kind of understood why you're all such fans of Doctor Who now. Do you know what I mean? There's a moral content there that is really, it's subtle, but it clouts you.
We've got a new fan, everybody.
I wonder, Sylvester and Sophie, one thing that happened every story, and this was obviously no exception, was that you'd have this incredible guest cast around you who would come in, and you'd have people who were recognisable for lots of different reasons. Some of them might be TV comedians, some of them might be film actors, you know.
Ken Dodd.
You had Ken Dodd and all sorts of people. But I wonder, from your point of view, how kind of proprietorial you felt about the fact it was kind of your show, and that every week you know, you were the kind of the one thing that stayed the same, and how easy the guest artists made it for you as well.
Well, my philosophy, because I'd guested in other programs before I got there, and normally you'd be in the rehearsal studios, and the clique would down there, and you'd be sitting there waiting for your bit, and then you go, well, I made my decision when I got there that this was going to be the utter opposite. And Sophie and I worked our butts off to make sure. Anton Diffring arrived miserable from the south of France. I'm only here. I'm doing this show because I want to, because of Wimbledon.
That's right.
That was it. and he was, by the end of it, he was smiling. And that was our job. And we had this job. Make sure everyone has a really good time. And the other day I saw Chunky Williams, Simon, and he said something very nice to me, and he said that I was a very good captain and I ran a really good ship and a happy ship.
That's absolutely true, and I can commend you absolutely for that, because you, as you say, everything is correct. You have the hierarchy, you know, and the stars, the original and the rest of it, and they moan like buggery, and they're last on set, and they don't know their lines and all the usual stuff. But you were the opposite of that. You were absolutely brilliant with all the cast.
And I have to say, Sylvester's passed that down the line, because doing Power of the Doctor with Jodie was exactly the same. It was.
Jodie was great.
She wanted everybody to be having a party.
Yeah, having a fun.
And it makes it fun, and you can then see it in the performances, and everybody just goes that extra bit of mile, and they stick their neck out, they be brave, and not frightened of failure.
I'm a bit nervous of that word fun.
Happiness.
Are you a killjoy?
Miserable. Yes.
Oh, so many people. You do a big musical, work your arse off, 8 shows a week, and for 18 months or something, which I've done. And somebody comes up and says, oh, it must be such fun. You look as though you're having the most wonderful fun. I'm going to punch them. No. It's my job. That's what I do for a living. It's not a hobby. I do it for a living.
I'll tell you
but
the
it was
person.
only for 2 weeks. Sorry, we only did it for 2 weeks. Rehearsal and on. Yeah.
The person who wasn't having so much fun as we were, if we were, was David John Pope. poor thing, who's in the Kandy Man costume.
Oh, God, no.
He had rehearsed, he's very tall and slender,
Right.
and he'd rehearsed this fantastic voice in the rehearsal studio, and he'd done all these kind of movements like this, and then I don't think he'd seen the costume until we actually got into the studio, and he was like sort of put into it like this. I remember him sitting, well, he couldn't even sit, he was leaning against something, and they were trying to feed him water through a straw and try somehow to get a fan in there. And then he mentioned that he needed to actually go to the toilet after about 12 hours or something like that. So they had to try and handle that. I still don't know the details of that, but yeah, it wasn't fun for him.
No, I bet it wasn't. Well, some of the others as well. Their costumes were angered him.
Yeah.
Andrew.
I had that man between my legs the whole time.
Yeah, well, why weren't you having fun?
Yeah, he's very adroit.
It was honestly, he was literally there. His hand was there, and I was going to this animal. I must say, I did fall in love with that animal. It was sweet.
I remember. Yes, I do remember you loving it.
But it comes across, Sheila, because it's a great prosthetic puppet, but it's you sell it because your emotion sells it, makes it real to the audience, and that I get tears in my eyes every time Fifi dies.
But it's so good at the end, isn't it, that this woman cries as an animal.
The heartless woman.
Yes, her pet. It's very true to life with that kind of woman.
It's like that moment where Thatcher drives off in the car from 10 Downing Street with a little tear in her eyes.
Yeah.
And Dennis, her own Fifi, by her side.
Oh, I thought Dennis was her Ronnie Fraser.
Ron, you're right. I was just being close.
But it was, it's an extra, there were moments in it when I was sort of going, because of the relevance for that period and for this period, you know. It's marvellous. So well done him and wife.
And Andrew, one of the things I know that was really important to you as script editor was to bring in kind of, to try out new writers, which is a very brave thing to do when you've got an established show like Doctor Who. It could have completely backfired, but actually, without that, we wouldn't have these amazing stories.
Well, Graham sent in a radio play about football, so that what could be less Doctor Who than that? But it just showed real talent. And then I discovered that he had written his university thesis on the grotesque in literature. And I thought, So suddenly I could see that there was a way in for this guy. And it took a long time for him to come up with an idea. And he was actually losing heart. He'd kept pitching ideas and they were all wrong. And one day he came in and said, what about a story about a planet where it's a crime to be unhappy? And bang. Because it's the sort of parable that's perfect Doctor Who shape. And I knew from that moment on, although there was a lot of work and a lot of hassle, and a lot of tribulation, I knew that concept was so strong and such a Doctor Who idea. It's a Who-ish idea. So I knew that it would work in the end, and it did, thanks to his brilliance. Kandy Man.
And while this was all going on in the background, despite the fact that obviously you're working away, filming the stories and doing your best, in the background, John Nathan Turner was doing quite a lot of batting in terms of there was a lot of pressure on whether the show was going to succeed or continue or survive or not. And this obviously was the penultimate. How much, Sylvester, were you aware of that going on, or were you sort of cushioned from all of that?
Yeah, they cushioned me. I had no idea.
Really?
And when we did that, the last scene in Survival, that speech that Sunny handed me, they handed me a speech, and I said, learn that, do that, and we did it. And I just thought it was a lovely speech to go off in. Didn't realise it was the end speech, it was saying goodbye.
Heartrending.
And was that the same for you, Sophie? Were you completely oblivious to the fact that this was going on?
Well, we filmed Survival, and then we went back into the studio to do the largely studio-based story. Ghost-like. So the very last scene of all that was filmed from the classic series was Catherine Schlesinger and Sylvia Sims turning to stone, which was
suspended animation.
Quite weird.
Spooky, yeah.
And then we all went downstairs to one of those horrible rooms at the BBC, the B something or other it was called, in the basement, and had our jolly party. And said, see you next term, because it was a bit like a school trip.
I mean, what happened was that later in the year, JNT phoned me up and said, hello, I've just phoned you up to tell you I've sent you a letter. I thought that was weird. But he said, okay, thanks, I'll look out for it. And he said, well, I may as well tell you what's in it. And so he read it, and it said, the BBC have decided they're going to put it into what was it?
Hiatus.
For a while. And that was it. 9 years later, they brought it back.
That's how they told you?
Yeah.
And then you rang me.
Yes, and I rang, told Sophie, hadn't communicated with us that way, yeah.
They're not good at sacking people, are they?
But it was, for a while, we went, we sort of blamed John or kind of, but it wasn't he, it turns out, had been, he'd put his whole career.
Who are we talking about?
The executive producer, John Nathan Turner.
Oh, right.
The guy with the curly hair and Hawaiian shirts.
And the cigarette.
Yeah.
And the vodka.
But he'd actually stayed on to save Doctor Who past his sell-by date, because he then never really did anything again after that.
Really?
Because the BBC didn't think that much of him.
But who knew all those years later that with the... What number Doctor was Jodie Whittaker?
13, no.
13. With the 13th Doctor, that you would be back again as Ace. It's an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Chris, as well as, you look through your CV and you see all the producing and directing credits, and it's a pretty prestigious document. But I don't think anything could have been probably a prouder moment for you than voicing the character of Phoebe. Because you do in the death throes.
Oh, do I?
I believe so.
Oh, I couldn't even remember that.
Is that correct?
Another of my skills, yes. Turn out and do that. Right.
Who are some of the directors that have, as well as you, that have worked on it, and writers over the years? Because often there's.
Well, I guess the classic was like kind of Terence Dicks and
Ben Aronovich.
Ben Aronovich, obviously, you brought in for the Dalek story, didn't you?
Yeah.
And Rona,
Robert Holmes was the great doctor.
Yeah.
Right,
Yesterday.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
fantastic people.
Because they've always had wonderful writers, haven't they?
and also there's the newscaster in the show was Andy Hulley.
That's right.
How
That's my
did
missus.
you find her?
Oh, yes. Well, she was fine because she was actually pregnant at the time with my daughter. Although my son's here as well, and he was born when we were doing the story before. So
there is a connection in your family now with the show
is the age
Beyond.
group. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So when did this one happen? Was
This
this
is
before
1988.
then?
1988.
So it was before they stopped it.
The year after was the last series. Yes, this is the last
penultimate. Yeah.
I was going to say it's not this one that finished you off.
Very nearly, but it was a nail in the coffin.
I bet it was.
Because Doctor Who has
exactly.
always been a hotbed for media interest, hasn't it? The tabloids over the years have sold more copies on the back of Doctor Who probably than, apart from Princess Diana, anything else pretty much. And that continues to be the case now. And there's also, I guess, there was a lot of stuff around what was acceptable or not in terms of censorship, and whether it's a children's program or a family show. How did this rate in that respect?
Well, we were in the drama series and serials, as it was called then, department, but they thought we were a children's show, so there's an awful lot of
There was always a tension
negativity,
there, wasn't there?
even in the building. So were you working on Doctor Who? It was kind of that.
When I got my job, I got a job at script editing at BBC of Doctor Who, and there's somebody at the BBC heard about it. They'd met me as a writer. They said, "Oh, you're working here?" And I said, "Yeah, on Doctor Who." And they said, "Oh, never mind."
Yeah. Wow. And then you look at this shows that these guys, these sort of knobs, were sort of promoting.
Well, they were forgotten.
All forgotten, and 90% of them were terrible. And we had more fun making this. Sorry to use the
When
pun.
did it start? When was the first Doctor Who?
1963.
63, was it?
Directed by Waris. You're asking about directors. Waris Hussain did.
Oh,
Yeah.
God,
And Verity
yes.
Lambert
Yes,
produced
Verity
it.
Lambert.
Yeah, and
produced the first-
Verity, yes. God, it was
So-
good people, all of them, weren't they?
It was it was founded on a very solid premise, which is terrific, and that's the key to
A lot of
longevity,
talent
as we know.
there,
Yeah, I believe Harold Wilson had something to... No, Harold Wilson, yeah. Prime Minister had something to do with it. He made a speech about the white heat of technology, and they approached the BBC and said, "Would you make a programme for children with science in it?" And they came up with Doctor Who.
Really?
Yeah, that's how it started.
It's great. This has been great, both a great celebration of the Happiness Patrol, but also a lesson for Sheila and others in the kind of in the show and its creation. I guess the media amounts for a lot, and I guess, as you were saying, people in the BBC didn't necessarily value their own shows. So I guess
they didn't know at all.
You know.
And some hardcore fans got very fed up with John's tenure on the show.
And I guess they were quite vocal.
Yeah, and as soon as they heard it was called the Happiness Patrol and saw what it looked like, they didn't look any further.
Vocal Doctor Who fans.
Michael Gray dines out on the fact that he killed it. He's a liar. Because what happened was he took it off, and then John Nathan Turner took him to America, because John was trying to break into America, and showed him the interest there. So Michael Gray came back and brought it back, and I was his doctor.
Yeah.
And then he left to join Television 4.
Channel 4, yeah.
Channel 4. He went off to Channel 4, so it had nothing to do with the death of it.
It was actually, wasn't it Peter Grugin who was head of series and serials? And he decided that he was going to get rid of Doctor Who and bring back his own fantastic production spend a lot of money on it, and it was going to be this great new series, and it was called El Dorado.
There you go.
Every
Really? Is that
episode.
true?
Yeah.
In the 60s, I got hooked on Doctor Who. And the reason why it was because of the politics in it, subtly put there. The 60s, it started to swing, it started to change. It was a kind of a revolution, a peaceful, wonderful revolution going on. And Doctor Who was the only decent thing on Auntie at the time that had anything that talked to young people like me and in a political way. So it's always been political as far as I'm concerned.
I think we got the answer right here at the end.
What?
He's not the end, he's next to the end.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when
Me?
Chris.
Well, I think, like anything else, you have to do things which
Oh,
are...
Mr. Bates versus the Post Office.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sorry, I
what
was
I mean.
Oh, sorry,
being a bit
Yeah.
thick.
Yeah.
I do think that's the most important television drama in literally decades. And
Well,
I'm
you worked
very,
on,
very
you worked on
proud of it.
Brookside a lot, which
I
Brookside
did
in
Brookside.
the early days was very much about doing
Yeah,
social
I
commentary
started
and very
that,
political.
yeah.
Well, in the 60s, I mean, you had Alvin Rakoff, you had all those
Yeah.
people, and Ken Loach, and
Yeah.
all that. So
You
it was
see,
a revolution.
if you do drama without any purpose, then it disappears into the ether and it's just bubblegum. So every drama has to sort of have power, which is the message, and that means it has to have some political debate going on within it. Otherwise, what else is it about, really? I mean, it's about people's struggles against something.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they're trying to make the most of their lives, that something comes against you, and that's the
But
sort of
Mr.
essence
Bates
of
has
drama.
really landed, and it's really made a difference, and I'm very, very proud.
Well, I know, it's amazing, you know.
It's incredible. Yeah.
But the arts generally have always been. Well, strangely enough, I'm just writing something at the moment, and something I'd forgotten about. At the end of the war, in 1951, we had the Festival of Britain, and it was an absolute celebration of this dying country, this bankrupt country, of the arts and science and creativity, and it was splendid. It wasn't just in London, wasn't just a festival hall, it was all round the three nations. And it wouldn't happen now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yeah.
We are a cultured country.
We're very creative.
And
country.
creative. But the cultures are ignored. Politicians, I mean, when I say Nadine Dorries was Secretary of Culture, it kind of sums it up what they thought of it, doesn't it? And,
it does.
And now, this government, I noticed Keir has once or twice mentioned theatre. And hopefully, I think the only person who goes to the theatre or knows anything about music is our king, strangely enough, who actually does seem to know a bit about it. But that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And that's what arts and the post office thing and all that does. It tells the nation what's happening.
Exactly.
And it's our duty to do that.
Yeah.
a pension. And a brilliant friend.
I mean, there is travel is what I got out of it. Because of the conventions, I've travelled all over the world. Been to Brazil, Australia, all English-speaking places, and I was on the Trans-Siberian Express in Siberia, and a Dalek popped up. It's amazing.
I don't get any of that.
Sheila, obviously you're known for so many different roles, but do people ever come and talk about Doctor Who with you?
Me?
Yeah.
I have to be honest, no. It's a bloody long time ago, you know.
They don't recognise me without
Doctor Who fans do. I mean, always, if I'm in the theatre or anything, the people at the stage door are always Doctor Who fans. Hundreds of books and pictures and things like that. So, yeah,
might be a few of those today. And I know, once again, obviously, Andrew, you've got your vinyl detective books and all sorts of other stuff, and Chris, obviously, we've talked about. Is there still a very high proportion of kind of recognition for you in Doctor Who?
The thing is, once it's on your CV, it's brilliant because people know it, right? Even people who haven't seen it on the other side of the world do know about Doctor Who. So it's just a brilliant entree.
Is that the same with you, would you say? Because there are some people who do spend part of their career trying to distance themselves from the show.
Well, yeah, and I can understand that because I found it a very negative effect on my career. Actually.
Really?
Yeah.
And
the Doctor Who thing, you know, I think it's a bit of a career killer for a lot of directors as well.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
It used to be for actors. It used to be for actors because
I found it hard. They said, "Oh, you've done Doctor," you know.
But generally, telly in the old days was not as good as film and theatre.
Exactly, yeah. So
you know,
there was a snobbish against
but
it.
That's changed totally.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because Doctor Who has a global audience.
Yeah.
And the people who watch the show, so many of them, it stayed with them, and it means a huge amount to them. They've literally, it saved them at times when they've had real lows in their lives, and they've been able to transport themselves into different worlds through the work that you've created. And I think, you know, you should never forget that, because actually what you've done is very important.
Well,
it's also crazy because, absolutely. I imagine if you're directing Doctor Who, you've got so many different elements to deal with that you don't get in, you know, like...
That was the reason that I wanted to do it and loved doing it. It was just fantastic, because the other shows I was directing EastEnders at the time in the early days. And as you say, I'd started Brookside, which was another great passion show of mine as well, and we got that up and running. But then the rest of it was kind of Bergerac or I can't remember all the other sort of shows. But you think, I don't.
But wasn't it because of telly being thought of in a rather snotty way?
Yes,
rather than just Doctor Who.
Yes, but I'm more of a telly person. I tried my go at filmmaking and ended up virtually bankrupt.
But I mean, my husband, my husband John Thor, he used to get so angry that even towards the end of his life, people called him a telly actor.
I know. There's a huge difference.
Because you're an actor, presumably, and it's an actor.
Yeah, you're in film, or you're in television, or you're in commercials.
Or theatre.
Or theatre.
Theatre's the top.
And exactly. And you know, we all borrow from the theatre, but the other three strands are completely separated.
Yeah.
They've sort of merged now. We're all dealing with the
very
same
much so now. I mean, people fight to do telly.
Yeah,
You've got big stars doing telly now.
Yeah,
I think that started with George Clooney, actually. Because he did a soap, didn't he?
Yeah.
But it's a funny old snobby business, our business.
It is.
It really is.
And Doctor Who really suffered from that snobbishness.
Did it? I didn't do enough of it to realise.
Putting Ace into the pink.
Sophie in pink.
Pink costume. I don't think so.
No, never.
In those days, that's what you did with girls. You put them in pink.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like both Sylvester and Sophie, that you had a sense of ownership about your characters, and that you did have the opportunity, if you really believed that something wasn't the way that your character would go, you could have that argument, presumably, could you?
I think that's right, yes. And there was a respect for, especially for these two, as they were in it every time, and therefore you were involved with costumes and, you know, the makeup choices and all that. But it was very specific, Ace's sort of look. Yeah. because I always seem to remember the first time I met you, you were in your bike leathers, but you're going to tell me that's
You're
not
obsessed
true.
with my bike leathers. I think the reason why you cast me, you popped into John Nathan Turner's office when I was talking to him and says, with my publicity photo, where my agent had written "has own leathers" on the back of the photo, and he said she has her own bike leathers.
Looking back, you must be proud of that.
Yes, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
You know, whatever anybody thinks.
I was looking forward to seeing what Pete and the guys had done.
Thank you.
Thank
you for reminding us of that.
Even then, I thought, oh, actually, you know, they're laughing in the right places.
Yeah.
They're getting it. The shots are solid. The cues are working well.
Absolutely.
You know.
And the last thing I was going to say, Andrew, you had an opportunity to revisit this, didn't you, in kind of cartoon form, as a sort of, you did a prequel, didn't you?
Yeah, I wrote a comic strip called The Death of Fifi, which I wanted to really do a good job because I felt I owed it to Graham, and I wanted to sort of honour the spirit of the story. So it was the origin story of your character and where she came from, why she was the way she was.
Oh, really? Right. Great.
Well, that is where we are going to end up. It's been, despite a few teething problems here and there, an absolutely amazing event, and I'm so grateful to you all for being here today and our previous guests. I know you're going to go and do a signing afterwards, so thank you for that. But a big, big thank you, Sylvester, Sophie, Sheila, Andrew, and Chris. Thank you very much.